Yeah, that's fine. Cool. That's just like Daniel and Christina did at OAuth yesterday. Okay, is this the agenda we follow?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so the first is HANA's, the HPKE. Okay,
Mm.
I will be able to switch between these and know what to project next.
Yeah.
Good. I'm going to tell my wife I'm about to be chairing a meeting, so don't worry.
And that sounds good.
Is the mic on?
Yeah, I tried it.
Okay. So welcome to Cose. We'll give people just a couple minutes. But for instance, maybe we can look at the note well slide while we're waiting.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, I can maybe take,
Are you able to advance the slides?
not now, you can try to give me the control over them.
How do I do that?
From here, I don't know, let's try to. Okay. Yeah, just
It'd be good to know how to advance slides. I hate these terms.
I mean, I see I can pass the control to other people, but not to myself. I mean, obviously I can just share the slides myself, but yeah. And maybe let me share the slides myself so that I can control them. And I will remove the slides from you and share the slides. Okay. I think maybe we can get started.
See if you can change slides.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's go over there.
Okay. So, hello everyone. We will be getting started. This is the Cose meeting uh, for this IETF. If you are in the wrong room, you are welcome to stay. So this is our note well. It applies for all the meetings. Please take a look at it if you haven't done that already. And if you have any questions, please talk to us or anyone, maybe the ID, before participating in discussions. We live by our code of conduct. Please take a look at it. I know we have been circled quite a bit during this ITF, but it's important to make yourself familiar with it. And this is the administrative part. We have our minutes at the following URL. Who will be willing to help with the minutes? Okay, Marco, thank you. If anyone wants to be helping, that will be really appreciated. And for Jabber and John, I think you said you can help, right? Okay, thank you, John. And here is our agenda. It changed a bit since the original upload on Data Tracker, so I made that visible here. Is there any bashing of our agenda? I would take that as a no. Then we can start with the document status. So we have the following documents that are past working group last call. The first one is the hash algorithms. As far as I'm aware, there are no pending changes or no pending action items. It's just waiting for the other documents in the cluster to be ready before getting published. Then for the OAuth 48 documents, we have a few iterations done recently. I believe all the comments that were raised were handled. I know some participants wanted to do one final pass through the documents, but other than that, they should be good to go. Then next is the X509 document. I think, Paul, we should chat how to upload the new revision. Um, yes. Okay. And yes, then the final of those documents is the countersigned document. I saw that the responsible AD did the review and it is now in last call.
Paul Wouters, AD. I just wanted to let you know that I'm new at the AD role. This is my first full-time IETF as the AD. And about half the people who've approached me so far are approaching me about this cluster of 4 documents that are waiting for a very, very long time and sort of ping-ponging between Karsten, Ben, and the RFC editor. We really need to get this out. So I don't know what I can do anymore because I already sort of tried to give you deadlines to get this cluster out because there's really a lot of people both inside the IETF and outside the IETF waiting on these documents to get RFC numbers to go out. So I'm thinking of in about 2 weeks to just push the button to the RFC editor to say, publish this, I don't care anymore what the status is. So please get Carson or whoever needs to do things to do them in the next 2 weeks so that we can get these documents out.
I suspect Ben Kadick is on the queue to talk about this very thing. I recognize Ben.
Yes, sorry, I was a couple minutes late joining, but I wanted to be here to be able to speak to this topic. And so I did send some updates to the RFC editor based on essentially a full review of the text. And I looked over the resulting diffs and they're basically good. Karsten spotted a duplicate word. We had the dreaded the going on. And I think there's like one other cosmetic tweak that I know of. And the only other thing that I still need to track down is just the specific numbers on the AEAD usage values. And so I'm thinking that the 2-week time frame should be reasonable here. I also had a list of open issues or potential open issues that I sent to the Auth 48 thread. And I was hoping to get some more input from other people on them because my proposed resolution was basically don't do anything for almost all of them. So if the chairs or Kirsten or somebody wanted to chime in on that, or if somebody else from the working group thinks that they have some good insight, I'm happy to send that list out more broadly. So I think the only other point I want to add is for Paul, and just to check basically that some of the changes that were made in Auth 48 were of the sort that would require AD approval as potential content changes, basically. And so if you could also take those 2 weeks to confirm that you've looked those over and you don't have any concerns that you want to push back on, that would be helpful to make sure we can actually publish at the end of the 2 weeks.
Yep. Paul speaking. Yes, I will do that.
Thanks. And I'll thank Kirsten again for his help in looking over many aspects of it.
Yeah, thank you, Ben and Karsten, for your diligence as well as Ivo in moving this forward. I see Marco in the queue.
Yeah, hi, this is Marco. Just a comment on the countersign
Speak
document.
louder, please.
Just a comment on the countersign document. I noticed the latest revision in section 3 refers a core document, and the specific reference got changed compared to the previous version. Yeah, I believe the previously referred document is more appropriate because that's where the actual countersigning happens. I was just double checking this morning with the security IDs. Looks like the case. I'll send out a mail to the last call thread also.
Hi, Paul speaking. Yeah, we briefly talked about the reference being wrongly fixed, so I'll double check this with Roman as well.
Thank you. Okay. I think those were our slides. Then I will move to James. Mm.
Test. Okay, cool. So Ross and I will briefly talk about two issues in the Cose HBKE document. As you know, there's the HBKE document was published as an RFC coming out of the IETF, and this document describes on how to accomplish the functionality of HBKE with the Cose structures. Next slide. So we are version 2 of the document. If you've been following the mailing list, you've seen a lot of exchanges back and forth between Hilary and myself. Thank you, Hilary, for all the reviews. There are two aspects that are worthwhile your time here. This is the first one, which I would like to cover, is we need to have an agreement on the format of the public key encoding, the ephemeral public key encoding that is sort of included in the encryption. So here I just, instead of copying the entire sort of structure of the HBKE with the recipient, etc., I just focus on what's in the, what's conveyed in the ephemeral public key. And I think discussion-wise, we got a little bit stuck between Hilary and myself on what the right format would be. And that's why we are seeking out to get feedback from you on your right-hand side. So the public key, the NIST B256 R1 curve in Cose is described in the following way. So you see the key type, which is set to this value EC2. Obviously, there's a key ID in there, or not obviously, but there is a key ID in there. Well, potentially. Then there's a curve indication, because obviously there are different curves. And then there's the encoding of the XY value, and there may be a compressed encoding of the point, depending on how you set the Y coordinate. Okay, that's also basically taken from the Cose RFC, and that's not my invention. Hilary proposes a slightly different format, so he would like to use a different key format. This is the octet key pair, if I remember that correctly. Key ID is the same, so uncontroversial. He wants to use a new value for the HBKE, so it's just temporarily assigned to that specific number. And then he basically takes the output of the HBKE algorithm that produces this ephemeral public key and dumps it into this raw data. And I think having two formats for a key is not ideal. So I think we should pick one, but which one?
Not wearing my chair hat, Mike Jones. Is there a compelling reason to not use the key format that's already been standardized by this working group?
Yeah, and I think that's where Hilary and myself sort of diverge in the views. His opinion is, if I correctly reflect it, and maybe he's online, is that he wants to basically use an HBK library to export what comes out of it and then dump it straight into this field, and the last field shown on the screen, without further sort of post-processing, so to speak. I think that's one argument. But maybe some of you guys have some additional input or different perspective.
Yeah, Mike Prorock.
Yes, thanks. Mike Perrock here. One of the things that concerns me in looking at the KTY discussion, both on Jose and Cose, is potentially overloading octet key pair, and especially CRV, to apply to things for which CRV either doesn't apply or isn't fully described by a single parameter. I am strongly in favor of the proposal on the right from the screen size, which I believe is yours on us as far as KTY EC2 in this case, with XY coordinates, because it completely describes what the actual key type by family, right, as defined in the RFC is, as well as how do you actually reference that from a curve perspective in this case. We've run into similar issues from a post-quantum standpoint, where we're getting into families of algorithms also that don't have curves or other things like that, right, that are novel constructions for which we need an answer to this. And so I think by going in EC2 KTY type here, we're setting that direction as a group as to a good path forward, so that we're not overloading and encouraging implementers to make mistakes as far as selection of algorithms. So that's all. Thank you.
I'll make a meta point. Those of you who want to join the queue should actually join it online. I'll nonetheless recognize Tobias, but the next time, please join the queue so that we're fair to the online participants.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'd much the same as the sentiment expressed before. I think we already have a key representation format for P256 keys. This is really just embedding it in a high level application. So the P256 public key representation with EC2 makes more sense, because the octet key pair representation here as well tends to sort of stretch the notion of the curve field with a custom tag too, to kind of layer on a higher level algorithmic sort of representation, which is HPKE, and kind of conflate the application. So I think the P256, the existing curve key representation here should be sufficient.
I recognize David Brown.
So I think that, excuse me, I think my opinion is probably pretty similar. I don't have strong opinions on which, but I'm concerned that the left proposal is taking a specific implementation to drive the spec rather than representing what is actually in the key.
Well, I was like, you judge consensus.
Okay, as chair, I'll observe that no one is speaking for Ilari's proposal other than obviously Ilari. Should we do a hum on that at this point to try to provide guidance to the editors? Oh, and shoot, do you know how to do the online hums?
Sorry, Paul, AD. Whether or not you do a hum, I don't think really changes much anymore, right? Because you still have to go to the list to confirm it anyway. And I think, the humming here is already pretty much in favor of the proposal on the right, from what I can see. So, I mean, you're free to hum, but you would still have to go to the mailing list anyway. So I don't think it matters in this case.
Okay, I'll ask a different question. Is anyone wanting to come to the mic to speak in favor of Ilari's proposal? Otherwise,
I see Ben maybe.
okay, I recognize Ben.
Yeah, I guess this is maybe a clarifying question, but Ilari's proposal had the raw key data as a 65-byte string, which in my understanding has a clear decomposition to the X and Y coordinate. And so that would tend to, if that's correct, that would tend to lead me to also prefer the right-hand side proposal using EC2 keys. And the only reason I can think of that would strongly make me prefer Ilari's proposal would be if there was some ambiguity or difficulty in actually converting the representation away from that proposed representation.
So Ben, this is Russ. My understanding is he's just using the exact HPKE algorithm that's in the RFC and taking the dump of that straight from the library.
Okay, so he doesn't want to have to peek into the internal structure of the HPKE.
Yep, that's what's going on as best I can tell.
Okay, to close this out, Eva, do you agree with me that the chairs should send a note to the list saying the consensus in the room appeared to be to use the standard representation, and asking if there's any discussion on that? Should that be recorded in the minutes?
Just for the chair's view, that is what's in the draft right now, is the right-hand side.
Okay,
So
that's what I thought. Thank you, Russ.
Okay, next slide, please. So one of the places that this draft is being used is in the suit working group, where we have encryption of firmware that's being loaded onto IoT devices. And so the encryption has to be done in conjunction with the bootloader. And the thing that is going on is the firmware signed and encrypted. So we don't really need an AEAD because the signature provides the integrity. And the way that some small devices manage their memory, such as flash blocks, they want to be able to encrypt chunks of it that match the size of the flash blocks so that the bootstrap loader and the encryption can be easily tied together. So in those cases, counter mode or CVC are much better aligned with that, but Cose Encrypt demands an AEAD. And so we think we should register some non-AEDA algorithms with big notes in the registry that says, you know, only use this if the data is already integrity protected in some other way. Or the approach we do not recommend is we define some Cose Encrypt Lite. And that seems like way more work to not be an AED as opposed to a note in the registry. So we're advocating, Hannes and I are advocating the register the non-AED AEAD algorithms with appropriate notes, and we're willing to write the internet draft if the group agrees that that's a reasonable way forward. We'd like to hear from you.
Recognize Cedric.
Thanks. I'm wondering if we could reinforce the statement by saying that integrity protection should be guaranteed before the encryption.
Can you get closer? Thank you.
Sorry. Yes, can we ask for that the integrity protection be guaranteed before decryption rather than separately from encryption to prevent attacks on unauthenticated decryptions that are still possible in principle?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. Or
so you could authenticate after decryption or by a signature independently. Yeah. I think asking for the signature to be checked before the decryption occurs will be structurally more secure. And so if you can reinforce the text to require authentication by signature before decryption, that will be stronger than separate of encryption.
Okay.
I recognize Jonathan Hamill.
Hi, Jonathan Hamill, Canadian Center for Cybersecurity. Just a clarifying question. You mentioned about notes guidance on use of these additional registry items. Would that be put in the registry itself? I'm not aware of there's a description column, but where would that appear?
Yeah, we'd have to, in the IANA considerations, ask IANA to add a place to put it. Thank you.
John Matson. I support registering encryption without integrity. This has popped up in other places as well. For example, group OSCOR, and I think there was some web discussion here where it was needed. I think in general, the default recommendation is strongly to use AAD unless you know what you're doing. And yeah, so I strongly support it.
And don't invent your own crypto algorithm
I
either.
recognize Brendan Moran.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. It is not practical to require a integrity verification prior to decryption in a firmware update scenario. The reason for this is that a device that is fetching an encrypted firmware may require that it fetches a block, decrypts it in place, and then writes it to flash. Otherwise, if you don't follow this procedure, you're doubling the flash cycles and you're risking the survival of the device when you have to do an in-place decryption later, because that requires additional journaling on top of what you already might be doing. So this is a very specific use case for firmware, and in that case, I don't see it being practical to require that you do integrity verification in advance of decryption.
So Brandon, I think you're talking about the potential for burning out the flash cells with too many writes. Is that your point?
It's not just
when you said
that
damaged
particular
device.
It is that. That's only part of the story, though. It's also the energy required to write to the flash. So there's multiple aspects here.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to recognize Ben and then John and cut the queue in the interest of time. Benjamin?
So I was doing a quick read through the 8152-bit struct, and while we do only talk about authenticated encryption modes, I didn't find anything that specifically says you must have authenticated encryption. So I think that would tend to support registering the algorithms, but I would add to that you really ought to include a section in the document that's like how to encrypt for non-authenticated encryption modes or whatnot. I'm just pulling up the actual section. So like
Ben, I think you'll find it in the definition of the alg parameter. It says identifies the AEAD.
Well, but we also have AE modes for KeyWrap.
And that's how I read it, is what I'm telling you.
Okay, I will check that.
KeyWrap is integrity protected. KeyWrap is an AEAD.
Well, there's no associated data. Anyway, just to solidify my point to Russ, we've got a section heading that's like how to encrypt and decrypt for AEAD algorithms. That's currently in the struct, and just do the analogous thing for that when you do this.
Right. Okay.
John Bradley?
John Bradley, Ubico. As I recall, when we were doing Jose, we made the explicit decision not to have non-AEAD encryption to attempt to prevent people from shooting themselves in the foot.
That's correct.
So it would be possible to define a composite algorithm that did, as was originally suggested, encrypted and then signed. That would be one possibility. I am sensitive to the constraints for software updates. I don't know that there's a perfect solution for this, but that is a pretty special purpose use case, and we have to balance the overall good of making this exception for Cose versus how many people are going to use it inappropriately because they're not reading the registry, versus the utility of having it as part of Cose. So I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily rush into making a general exception for Cose to have non-AEAD bulk encryption?
Well, I guess the alternative is software encryption not using Cose, which I think would be worse, in my opinion.
So it would be my suggestion, Russ, to write the draft. And as I told you previously, there is a precedent for registering Cose algorithms as deprecated from the get-go. We registered RSA SHA-1, I personally did, because it's in TPM1 and is used as deprecated because we're trying to get rid of SHA-1, but it's there in practice. And I view this as somewhat analogous. I'm not promising the working group will adopt the draft, but I think the next step is to write the draft and make the case.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. So we'll see how the adoption call goes.
Next is CBOR encoded cert by John Matson.
Yeah, I don't have any slides. So just a bit of update. We have submitted a new version just to not make it expired. We have not had super much time to work on this due to other things and me being on parental leave. But there has been work ongoing. There is a master thesis student looking at OCSP encoding in CBOR or in C509 specific CBOR. There's also been several people expressing interest. Derek Atkins and Manisha Malik has requested C code implementations on either the mailing list or on GitHub. Armando Garcia from Fraunhofer has announced that he's soon ready with his C implementation, and this is great news. It has been requested, and I think also more implementations of the C509 is a good step to move this forward. Also comments from Carrie Bonnell from DigiCert that suggested a change in the general subtree thing and also suggested some improvements to the document structure to place things in subsection to align with RFC 5280. This seems also very good suggestion. We will look at this and make issues. Otherwise, I think it would be good with more reviews is possible. We hope to be able to work more with the document later this year.
Are there people in the room or online that are willing to do a review of this draft? Hannes?
Great.
Thank you. If you want, of course, you can always just do a review and send it on the list. But thank you.
Okay, next up is Tobias Looker to talk about two drafts, the BLS key representations and the claims and headers. And in full disclosure, I'm a co-author on these, so I recuse myself from all chair actions about these documents.
Okay, thanks. Next slide. So just a bit of context, this was recently adopted by the working group, and this draft registers the required parameters for both the JWK and Cose key cryptographic key representations for the what's known as the Barreto-Scott BLS family of curves, both the 12381 and 44581 variations. Just a quick note about the BLS curves. They're said to be pairing friendly, which enables some novel algorithms beyond, namely digital signature algorithms beyond standard or conventional digital signatures. And the BLS family are the most popular in use today. The only others that are notable are the Baring-Nitto curves. However, BLS are favored in most applications. And there is formal definition of the BLS curves as a work item at the CFRG as well for context. Next slide. So just a quick note on a couple of different algorithms that this uses. One is an aggregate signature scheme, which enables aggregating signatures over the same payload together where the same result can be checked against the individual signer's keys. This is useful in multiple applications, most notably in blockchain applications. It's already in use in networks like Ethereum and Filecoin. And the signature scheme itself is also a item of the CFRG. So this draft we're talking about is only registering the key representations, but this is really just talking about the algorithmic usage of these keys. Next slide. Another scheme example for these key representations is a scheme known as Bibius signatures, which we proposed to the CFRG this week as a work item. And most notably, that scheme supports several different novel properties such as selective disclosure, proof of possession, and unlinkable proofs. So, yep. Next slide. And this is really just informational context for the algorithmic usages and of this scheme. So I actually think that the last couple of slides were just really informational. So we can probably skip past this. Really, the updates for this draft at this stage with BLS key representation, we can probably just flick through these things. Is that the key parameters have essentially been defined in the draft. The only outstanding item that I have on my list is to produce some samples for these key representations in both Cose key and JW key as informational. So yeah, any comments on that draft? Okay, maybe switch to the next. Okay, this is another draft. So next slide, thank you. So the rationale for this is that JSON Web Tokens, which is obviously a related predecessor to Siebel Web Tokens, included normative text that permitted you being able to put JWT claims in the protected header. However, when CWT was standardized, it didn't really define the equivalent behavior, and this draft sort of rectifies or creates a mechanism to do the equivalent in CWT. And in general, being able to put CWT claims in the header of Cose structures has a couple of possible useful applications. Next slide, please. So one of them is encrypted CWTs. In some scenarios, when you're encrypting, say, a CWT, there's a desire to have some of the claims that are also going to be present in the payload replicated into the unencrypted header. You know, this includes things like the ISS claim or token validity information. They might facilitate in the decryption process, help you say identify the key that you need to use for decryption, or validate aspects of the token prior to investing in a decryption of it. Next. Another use case we've found as well is when you're using a Cose sign structure that's featuring a detached payload. So the payload may not, in fact, be a CWT, and it may not actually be in the structure. Being able to use standard CWT claims in the Cose header of the structure just means that you're not redefining claims that are equivalent to CWT claims for bespoke purposes. So again, we've found applications where we are producing content, signing a signature over a detached piece of content, and we want to be able to describe who the signer is, and maybe some validity information over that signature, over that payload. which isn't a CWT itself, like a CWT structure. So being able to put information like who the signer is and token validity information in the header again is beneficial there. And last one, thank you. And so just one key design consideration to sort of call out here. The CWT claims namespace and Cose header parameters are distinct registries. They have distinct numeric allocations for their claims that pre-exist. Therefore, we can't merge them like as is the case in JWT, where you can simply put ISS directly in the header. So this draft essentially intends is registering a new header parameter whose value essentially is a map or a structure that contains the CWT claims inside it. So with that, that's mainly the description. Any questions on that?
What are the next steps?
Yeah, so the only outstanding question that I think we had some feedback on the list briefly about whether or not to include a sample CDDL within the draft to make it clearer exactly how it's essentially how it is represented within a Cose header. So that is something for me to follow up on.
Okay, then Michael, Prorok.
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you for the work on this, Tobias. This is extremely useful, especially downstream and other work items. As a co-chair at Community Credentials Group, for instance, I know there are multiple drafts kind of in process that will leverage these kinds of techniques to kind of provide a pathway into more binary representations of some of these items. And that's critical for high volume traffic, especially in cyber physical supply chains where data still needs to be verified. So very supportive of the work. Very much thank you for your time and effort on this.
And then Karsten.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to be able to transport CWT claims with any Cose structure. The one thing I'm not so sure about is that I understand what that specifically means. So if you have a CWT in there and are putting a few more claims on the outside, then it's pretty clear to me what the combination of those claims would mean, at least if they don't conflict with each other. But if you just take a random Cose-Sign data structure and slap a few CWT headers on top of that, that may not have a very well-defined meaning. So the answer to this question is, of course, that you can have more than one such header parameter for each weird kind of meaning you might have in mind. So you don't have to have a single header parameter that says, I slap a CWT claim on this Cose structure, but I'm not telling you what it means. That would not be so useful. So that's maybe a direction that we should look at, come up with a few examples and explain what putting the data there actually means. The other question you had is, should you put CDDL there? And the answer, of course, is yes.
So, sorry, just so I can clarify, Karsten. So in particular, your question is around the usage of the parameter in, say, the detached payload case, where the overall structure itself is perhaps not, it's not actually a CWT, but using that header, you're saying would be misleading? Or?
Well, it's just not clear what it means. And I think we should be very explicit. These CWT claims are all defined in a way that they can be used in a certain context. And if you pull them out of their context, they still might have a meaning, but not necessarily. So I think it's a good idea to be explicit about what is meant by that.
Right. I just to clarify though, my observation is if you register this as a general purpose claim where CWT claims can go, applications would be free to use that in even structures that are using detached payloads, right?
Well, I'm not talking about the claims. The claims are already there. So let's look at the not before claim that we have in CWT. That's already registered. Now, if I slap this not before claim on top of a firmware upgrade that is signed by me, what does it mean?
So this is Mike speaking as an individual. I agree we should produce a treatment of these questions in the document. We'll take an action item to do so and send it to the working group for review.
Yes. So I have a comment on that.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, we know CWT is CWT. If it's a CWT officially, it's used for authentication, and it has the authentication semantics. Mike is shaking his head no. So there's a draft for content types for EAT, and as we know, EAT uses CWT. So there's we're trying to work through that there. So I guess I'm not saying I have the exact answer here, but it seems like it is related to the content type that might be in the Cose header or in the surrounding MIME identifier or in the tag identifying some tags around it. So it seems like it might be related to that.
Yeah, no, that was all we really wanted to share on that design consideration. So we'll take the action to document up some more of those cases to describe the behavior, and thanks.
Thank you. Next up is Ori Steele about post-quantum.
Hello, can you hear me? Is it good? All right. So this is my first time presenting at IETF, so apologies for any missteps as we get through this. So today I'll be talking about some work that we've done to attempt to represent some of the key and signature proposals that are coming out that are post-quantum resistant. So what's the deal with post-quantum cryptography? Hopefully you've been reading the news lately. There's been some announcements about it. Why do we need post-quantum resistance in some of these cryptographic constructions for digital signatures or key agreement? And there's a long answer to that, which I encourage you to read on your own, but essentially Shor's algorithm is involved in a number of the answers to specific questions on that front. So why are we here at Cose to talk about this? Essentially, what we would like to do is to support an upgrade path for folks who've been using Cose and HOSE representations with pre-quantum algorithms for these post-quantum algorithms. So we want to give developers a sort of familiar path to upgrade where things kind of look the same, but now they've got some coverage for some of these post-quantum attacks. So what algorithms and why? As I mentioned before, this is mostly focused on key and signature algorithms, right? So key representations for post-quantum schemes and signature representations for post-quantum schemes. And I want to be very clear, like, we're here to propose the envelope formats, the serializations for these, not the fundamental cryptography that would be more appropriate at the CFRG, and the work's already underway. So specific constructs that we're looking at, there's basically two main families, the lattice approaches with all of the wonderful drama that comes along with them, and the hash systems. And so we're hoping to register representations for both of these so that we don't just register one family that might all of a sudden suffer from a particular attack, say on lattices. If we only looked at registering lattices and there was a critical break, and attacking lattices, that wouldn't be great. So if we register lattices and hashes together, we get a little bit of a better defense. And at the bottom, like as I said at the beginning, the biggest announcement is NIST has finally announced the candidates for standardization, and there's been a call for additional algorithms, additional signature algorithms as well. So keep your eye on those announcements from NIST, and that's a major reason why we're here to talk about it today. Next slide, please.
I met a question. Do you want to take questions now?
Oh,
or-
yeah, please.
Yeah, so
Please.
Brendan, yeah.
Just a clarifying question. You've said here that it's key representations that you're looking at, signature and key representations. Do you mean signatures and key exchange algorithms, or are you looking at encapsulating keys?
So we're primarily just looking at key representations like JWK or Cose keys, and signature representations like, you know, the JWA, JWS versions, or, you know, CWT representation. So not not any fancy sort of encapsulation in this one. You want to take it?
So
Mike?
no key exchange algorithms.
Yeah, this is Mike Perrock. I'm one of the authors on the spec. So Brendan, yeah, just a clarification. We're avoiding any of the key encapsulation stuff right now. We have focused 100% on the 3 signature algorithms based on 3 different classes of problems. So we have dilithium representing learning with errors type problems, you know, Falcon coming more out of the N-true side of the world, and then coming in also with Sphinx from the hash side. But we've avoided it for a variety of reasons, any of the actual key encapsulation and exchange stuff for the time being. That is a topic that will come up later, but we'll have to wait on CFRG actions and some other items that we're involved in. So
Okay,
does
thank
that
you.
help?
Yep, thank you.
Next slide, please.
There are 2 more people in the
go ahead.
queue. Ben.
Ben Kadek here. So I think I just want to solidify the previous question. So like you're looking at the key representation so you can like publish the public key that was used to make the signature.
Yes, sir.
And John.
Yeah, John Erickson. I think Cose should definitely standardize everything. I think we should limit us to what NIST standardizes. But I don't think we should make sure that this is not published before NIST has published the final standards. They might change. I don't think we want a situation where somebody starts implementing and then there are discussions right now on the NIST email list on exactly what kind of symmetric algorithm to use, at least in the key exchange. Waiting with key exchange seems good because it might rely on HPK for that.
John, Mike again here. Yeah, fully agree. I think we should wait, you know, for any kind of final publication type stuff, especially because parameterization is so key with so many of these problem types. One of the important things, though, to get the draft out early and, you know, being refined is the fact that there are federal executive orders here in the US that are forcing us to identify a path for interoperability and crypto agility. So if we're not doing that in a standardized way, we will wind up in trouble where one agency is attempting to do something one way, private sector another vendor in private sector another way. And so we won't be able to actually see how this stuff works in practice when we're working on a hard timeline. So it's a little bit of a nuanced situation compared to normal, but fully agree. Until we actually hit final standardization and can lock in the parameter sets for each of these algorithms, we should not attempt to finalize and publish.
I'll make a clarifying point about IETF process, which is pertinent to this, which is it's possible and often normal to get a draft to essentially final status, even to the point of it being in the RFC editor queue, but it to be held there until the normative dependencies that it takes, such as the algorithm definitions themselves, are final. So, I mean, our area director could also confirm this, but I would encourage you to work in parallel with NIST and the CFRG so that we can all land at the same time.
And thank you for that advice. That's quite helpful.
Pavel, it's 80. So yeah, I encourage you to join the PQC list that we just created, because this is coming up in multiple different working groups. And so on one hand, we want to avoid like everybody doing their own thing and coming up with something different. We want like people to learn from each other and move forward in a somewhat more structured way and see if we can like deduplicate some of the work.
Yes, and we are already on that list and actually are making sure that we have co-editors on this. For instance, Michael Osborne and Christine, who are working on some of the kind of lower level representations of some of these keys so that we have good overlap between the authors and editors, et cetera, that are working on this.
Perfect.
I think this was my last one. Yep. So I think we've gotten into a bunch of the specifics already, but just to sort of highlight the NIST announcements, Sphinx Plus, that's the hash-based system, Falcon and Dilithium, two lattice-based systems that are included in that announcement. As I mentioned before, we want to see an intuitive upgrade path for these post-quantum schemes. In some cases, there might be folks who are jumping, from staying in RSA for a very long time to some of these newer systems if we have an encoding representation that can support them. As I mentioned, some agility in the post-quantum sort of family is also an objective, and we want to anticipate the potential for exploits or attacks on a particular family. So again, cryptographic agility, a good thing. Another sort of key goal here is, as we mentioned, these envelope formats, and we're talking about, KTY and CRV and these other key representation components. Registering, two new families of crypto system at the same time really forces us to reevaluate or clarify how the existing term definitions for KTY and CRV and these other key representation terms are to be used. And so this is a great time for us to provide better guidance and clarity on some of the questions that were raised before in the HPKE talk. And again, in the draft, we're going to be calling for reservations for some of these key and signature, types, the algorithm definitions, the key type definitions.
John, what about hybrid systems or whatever the IETF choose to call them?
Yeah.
I think NSA has said they will go with PQC only in CNSA 2.0. At least I think that was what France has said, that they will enforce hybrid solutions for the next years. Will you standardize? I didn't see that in the draft. Is the solution to nestle things, or will you suggest some? It should be discussed at some point.
Yeah.
I think it probably needs to be supported, both pure PQC and hybrid.
Excellent question. There's been some discussion about that already. And my position on it is we should be clear about representations for post-quantum schemes before we talk about hybrid schemes combining them. So I see this as a necessary step towards that objective, but certainly that work can start happening in parallel as well. And I think both of those are good ideas to sort of proceed with. Just specific to this draft, we're only focused on the post-quantum key representations and not registering approaches for hybrid schemes.
Ori, 2 minutes. And
Yeah,
then
next slide.
officially-
This is, I gave him the harder ones.
Ori is going to put me on the spot, but I would say let's just being time conscious since we've had good engagement here. Can we flip to the next slide here? Really, for us, this is about next steps. We've gotten things up to an 01 draft, had great feedback in, especially from some of the authors, and great support from folks who are working on the core signature suites. Really big next steps for us now is clarity on KTY and ALG, as mentioned by Ori, and also as came up with the Ilari situation earlier in some other contexts as well. So those are things that I think are great discussions on the list. We are now adding, since standardization path has been announced, we are adding in good detailed examples for Falcon and Sphinx. So we have those in for dilithium already. We'll now be doing the same for Falcon and Sphinx. And that moves us into piles and piles of test vectors, which I'm of course going to try to hand to Ori, but always love help on. Key thing for us is we would love to get this adopted by the working group. There are a lot of details here. There are a lot of smart people in the working group and in the room. We want feedback in because this is going to impact all of us. So that's kind of the next key step that we're after, is kind of moving it, you know, hopefully from a place where we can begin to really work on this seriously into broader work with the working group itself.
Any discussion on that point? In the interest of time, does anybody want to speak against a call for adoption being sent to the mailing list? Hearing none, the chairs will proceed to do so.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mike and Ori.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the meeting. We have 0 minutes for any other business. If you want to say something, please go to the mic now. Okay, well, since no one running for the mic, the meeting is officially over. Thank you everyone for your participation.
Thank you.